Not all Rolex GMT Masters were created equal. Some GMT Masters are actually more equal than others. Let's get into it. So on this channel, we've recently spoken about all the GMT Masters, excluding one, the Rolex GMT Master 2 reference 116710 LN. So essentially it's the very first 6-digit ceramic GMT Master 2. Some quick specifications: 40mm case diameter, 48 from lug to lug, 12mm of thickness, and it's got the Rolex caliber 3186 movement with a 48-hour power reserve. So this is a GMT watch, and it has the bidirectional ceramic bezel with the 24-hour markings. Up until I got my hands on this piece, I actually thought it would be the favorite of the bunch of GMT Masters, because I like something subtle. I like something that not everyone knows exactly what it is, but those who do know really know a lot about it. So not too flashy, but at the same time packing the specifications. I'm sure a lot of you watching this video feel the same way and really swear by this particular reference of the GMT, considering this to be the best of the bunch. So I'd seen endless images of this on Instagram, particularly by That Watch Addict. He has one and he makes this watch look so unbelievably good in pictures. So I thought it was much sleeker and more subtle than the Batman or the Pepsi, and it's really like a Submariner if you don't look at it with a trained eye. And I really like that aspect of it because it's not a Submariner, it is a GMT Master, but most people wouldn't really know that. And it's sleek, it's all black, it's got that slight pop of green with the text GMT Master 2 on the dial and the GMT/24-hour hand. I thought all of those characteristics lended it to be such a beautiful, subtle and sleek sleeper hit. So I basically convinced myself that this was the best GMT Master out there. I thought if I was to get a GMT Master, it would have to be this one because of the reasons I just mentioned. Then finally I got hands-on with the watch, and then I realized that my lust after this piece was more conceptual than real. I love the pictures on Instagram, I love seeing photos and videos of it, but then in person, for some reason, it just didn't hold up to the same standard. Maybe I'd overhyped it for myself, maybe I thought it was more spectacular in person than in pictures, because after all, it is a simple watch. The combination is very subtle and there's not too much going on the dial. So I don't know if it's that reason why I found this watch to be slightly lackluster, just aesthetically speaking, but it just happened to be that way in person, hands-on. Another thing that probably didn't help is I looked at the Batman and this simultaneously, and the Batman was just so much more. There was so much more to the Batman than there was to this watch, and I didn't really feel that connection towards this piece. It was one of those watches that I can appreciate a lot, and I love looking at the pictures of it, but it's not something that I actually want to own for myself. And that's when you really truly know how you feel about a watch, whether you'd actually pick one up for yourself. See, I'm still really conflicted about this watch. I see a lot of images and videos of it, and I think, okay, I really like this watch. It has everything going on for it. But then I do recall my experience in person, and it was just not it for some reason. It's a bit hard to describe, but sometimes you just don't feel a connection with a watch, even though theoretically you thought you'd like it a lot. Now I'd like to give a quick plug to Ken Watches, as they're the ones who let me get a hands-on with this piece and most of the new watches on the channel. So they're a watch dealer in Hong Kong and they do ship worldwide, so do check them out at kenwatches.com if you want some really cool pieces. Now let's get on to why you clicked on this video. Are all GMT Masters destined to go up in value? And there's a specific reason why I chose this watch for this video. Now, typically the Batman and the Pepsi have skyrocketed in value compared to the retail price. Whether you look at the first reference or you look at the newer reference or the reintroduction of the Oyster on the 126710 BLNR or BLRO, all of the other references of the GMT Masters have gone up in value, but this one. Now, technically, if you really looked at it, you could say, okay, it's had a long run from 2007 to 2019. That's at least 12, 13 years, possibly. And that means that there's a lot more of these watches in the market. They've never been refreshed. So essentially the first watch is probably the same specifications wise to the 2019 watch, 2007 and 2019. So It's got the same movement. It was never updated. So it was discontinued in 2019, and it doesn't seem to be something that Rolex wants to relaunch. Now there's this common argument that anytime Rolex discontinues a watch, it will really go up in value. It will skyrocket in value. That's the common narrative that everyone seems to be saying online, or whether you speak to dealers or people simply listing their watches for higher prices with the reason that it's been discontinued, you can't get it new from Rolex anymore. And this watch is a good example of why that is not always true. See, the Batman and the Pepsi, they're still in production, but they're going for a lot more than this piece. So technically, by that logic, this watch should have actually caught up to the values, at the very least, of the first gen Batman, which was discontinued, but now it's sort of been reintroduced with the new release. It's just the new Oyster, but the only difference between the 116710 and the 126710, both BLRO, the first gen, second gen, with the Oyster bracelet both, the only difference is Swiss made on the dial. And now some people argue that this is something that matters to collectors, but honestly, I don't see people really caring about this minor detail. So let's go back to the 116710 LN, this black dialed GMT Master 2, and let's take a look at the prices available on Chrono24. Now, to preface this, Chrono24 is not the most accurate estimate of real-world pricing for any of these watches, because 6.5% is the commission Chrono24 gets across the board, unless you're a dealer where it's reduced, but then there's monthly fees. But still, it's a very high commission once you get into the multiple tens of thousands. So once you cross 10,000, a 6.5% commission is $650. Now that is a hell of a lot of margin just for Chrono24. Now the dealer who's selling this piece, or the private seller, also needs to make money on these things. So it's quite ridiculous to think that you'd have to have a 6.5% margin that you just give away, and then on top of that you still need to make something similar between 500 and 1,000 US dollars. So that works out to be 13-14%. And those kind of margins on a watch are kind of unrealistic. That's why Chrono24 pricing is quite inflated, and it doesn't really reflect the market pricing. So let's take a look at the prices on Chrono, and we'll take off that 6.5%, so we get a little bit more accurate estimate of what these watches are actually selling for. Now you can see that the values for this watch range from 11.5K to about 15.5K for the 116710 LN. Now if we take the 6.5% off the bottom, so you get 10.75K at the base, and then you get 14.5K at the top end. So the range is between 10.75 and 14.5. That's also quite a large range, but this watch was in production from 2007 to 2019. Now let's take a similar look at the Batman on Chrono24 doing the same things. So as you can see, for the 116710, the first gen Batman, the listings begin at 15K, and they go all the way up to 24K, which is frankly ridiculous and not realistic at all. So let's take the top end to be 18K, which is much more realistic for this watch. Accounting for the chrono fees, we have 14K and 17K, 16.8K effectively. So keep in mind that this entire comparison is to do with discontinued watches and whether they really go up in value. And it's hard to say that with the Batman in this case, because like I mentioned, it's been reintroduced and it's virtually the same but better. So technically the values should be worse than they could have been had Rolex not redone this. But the 116710 LN, so the black GMT Master, no longer made, that should follow the pattern that people assume, where the watches should skyrocket in value simply because they're not being made anymore. And that's not really the case with this watch. So back in 2019, these were going quite a bit over retail because they had just been freshly discontinued, and people were onto this thought of, well, it's going to go up now, it has to go up. So dealers just listed them higher. So around 12,000 is where they were sitting at in 2019. And if you take a look at it now, 10.75, 11K, it's basically the same. It's been 2 years. They've not really gone up. We're looking at the lower end of the market, of course, but still, they've not significantly changed in price. And it's been a while for the market to set and saturate with all the new dealers trying to pump up the values, and this is basically what they're selling at. So this means that not every single watch is destined to simply go up in value just because it's discontinued by Rolex. So I think this is a very good example of why you shouldn't just blindly believe that any sports model will go up in value. So ultimately this shows that not all GMT Masters were created equal. The Batman and Pepsi certainly have a lot more going for them than this piece. Who knows, in some years maybe people will really recognize that, okay, there's not so many pieces of the black GMT Master, entirely black one, listed, and that's a collectible watch. But this narrative of something being collectible just because it's not being made anymore, it's not foolproof. So I believe this is one of those instances where reality really catches up with the hype. So to conclude, will this rise in value further? That's possible. I do recognize that that is a possibility, but I think it's more likely that the market has saturated, the interest has dropped, and it will take a long time for it to go back up. So I don't think these are going to fly up in value anytime soon. That's been it, guys. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one. Cheers.